On this episode of RevHang, Daniel and I talk about the MotoGP Catalan Grand Prix, the IndyCar Detroit and Road America Grand Prix, and the Formula One Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Let's do it. Hello everybody, and welcome to RevHang. I'm your host, Nathan Nevue, and alongside me today as my co-host is not Ben Bagley, but my good friend and the man who got me into F1 in the first place, Daniel Weigel. How are you, Daniel?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. I'm super excited to have you on. It's been a while since we've hung out, so this is awesome. Ben is out in Michigan racing his car and having an absolute blast, I'm sure. He'll be back to talk about the British Grand Prix at the beginning of next month. With all that being said, again, I'm very excited to have Daniel on board with me today. We've got a lot of races to talk about, so we'll just dive right in, starting with MotoGP. All right. So, the MotoGP race 2 weeks ago took place in Barcelona, Spain. It was the Catalan Grand Prix. We'll just go through the top 10 in qualifying to give you some context. In first place, taking pole position was Aleix Espargaro, followed by Francesco Bagnaia, Fabio Quartararo, Johan Zarco, Fabio Di Giannantonio, Jorge Martin, Alex Rins, Maverick Vinales, Luca Marini, and Paul Espargaro in 10th. So this race was pretty cut and dry for a MotoGP race. There wasn't a ton that happened, but I mean it was better than some, and also there were a couple of interesting moments. At the beginning of the race,
Right.
Taka Nakagami outbraked himself into turn 1 and took out Alex Rins and Francesco Bagnaia.
Yep, straight into the gravel.
Yeah, not a great crash, and it was actually kind of scary because when he went over, his head actually hit the back wheel of, I think it was Bagnaia, and so he just took him out with his face basically. But everybody was okay.
It could have been a lot worse. That's certain.
Yeah, that's for sure. There were a couple of minor injuries, but no one was seriously hurt, and I don't think any seasons are going to be seriously hindered, so that's good. But Nakagami apologized for it afterwards, and I think everybody's cool with each other again. But anyway, after that, Quartararo took an early lead. Then we had some DNFs with Bezzecchi, Bastianini, and Gian Antonio. They slid out into the gravel early on, kind of in the first half of the race. It was pretty processional from then on out, except for Aleix Espargaro and Jorge Martin. They got into quite the scrap between lap about 10 and 17.
That's what
going
I'm
back and forth. Yeah, it was a pretty scrappy fight. There were several overtakes, but I believe Jorge Martin ended up coming out on top. Well, actually, no. Aleix Espargaro came out on top, but then on the last lap of the race, he slowed down and started waving like he DNF'd or something.
he pulled one of those, Daniel playing Forza moves, the old, hey, last lap, we're all good. Nope. No, guess again there, bud.
Yeah, so there was...
come on. I'm sitting here being an armchair expert on motorsports this week, and come on, dude.
Yeah, you gotta know how many laps there are.
This is amateur hour. They have a board at the side of the track, and they tell you, hey,
right,
you got one more to go.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows what was going on in his head, but yeah, it is certainly funny to laugh at, especially at that professional level when somebody does something that you could do on your own couch at home playing a video game,
Oh, absolutely. It was a little unfortunate for him.
It was,
and actually quite important in the scheme of the championship, as he was. I think he's second right now, so not great. But yeah, he slowed down as he crossed the line on the second to last lap, and got passed by, I think, 3 people before he realized the race was still going.
Yep. And it kind of just hurts to see, It just causes you a little bit of internal pain.
Just a little bit. I think everybody died on the inside a little bit. But anyway, we'll go through the results real quick. In first place, winning the race, was Fabio Quartararo, the championship leader, followed by Jorge Martin, who is now on form again. He had, I think, in the first 7 races, he DNF'd 5 times. So it's good to see him pulling some results.
You're right.
Now.
Definitely. And in third place, we have not Espargaro.
Yes, it was Johan Zarco. And then in fourth was Joan Mir, followed by, in fifth, Aleix Espargaro, where he ended up. And then Luca Marini, Maverick Vinales, Brad Binder, Miguel Oliveira, Alex Marquez in 10th, followed by Remy Gardner, Darren Binder, Franco Morbidelli, Jack Miller, Raul Fernandez, Michel Pirro, Paul Espargaro, and that was the top 17, and those were all the finishers. And then we had a ton of DNFs.
Oh, yeah.
Starting with Andrea Dovizioso, and then Fabio Di Gianantonio, Enea Bastianini, Marco Bezzecchi, Francesco Bagnaia, Alex Rins, Taka Nakagami, and Stefan Bradl. Wow.
Yeah.
It was definitely an attrition race.
Yeah. I mean, I got to be honest here, especially for the listeners. I don't really follow MotoGP. I'm not super familiar with it, but 8 DNFs seems high.
It's a little much, yeah.
Even for motorcycle racing, where people do sometimes just fall off of the bike.
Yeah.
I mean,
MotoGP tends to have a higher attrition rate than other motorsports, but it's not that high usually.
Yeah.
It's not like half the field DNFs like it seemed like happened this time. But anyway, so it wasn't a super eventful race other than that one incident at the beginning, and then a small little battle, and then the little oopsie at the end. But yeah, that's what we'll say for MotoGP this week. And then we'll move on to IndyCar. We have 2 races to go over. The first one happened 2 weeks ago. It was at the Detroit Grand Prix in Detroit. We'll go through the top 10 in qualifying for context. First was Newgarden, followed by Sato, Pagano, Castroneves, O'Ward, Malukas, Herta, Ericsson, Dixon, and McLaughlin. You're actually you're going to need a lot more than 10 for context, but there was so much movement in this race, which is kind of weird. It was a very strategy-heavy race.
Right.
As Detroit tends to be, because it's a street track and it's not super easy to pass there. It's very bumpy. It's a very demanding track, and so strategy plays a huge part in it. But all that being said, Alexander Rossi made an early charge. He was absolutely flying through the field. And then so was Will Power. Will Power started in 16th place, and by like the 20th lap, he was up into first.
Right, that's pretty incredible, regardless of what series you're racing in.
Yeah, and he commanded that whole race, even though he started 16th. It was pretty incredible to watch. But we had some early DNFs and crashes with Scott McLaughlin and Graham Rahal hitting the wall. If you tap the wall, it's just concrete, and so your car is pretty much toast unless you get really lucky and hit it really square on. But Castroneves also DNF'd, but he had a technical failure. His steering wheel just decided to stop working.
Oh, great.
Yeah, don't
That's
like
what you
that.
want.
No.
So,
yeah, he had to pull into the pits, and that was his race. But, after that, it was just watching the strategy play out. As we watched Power pit for alternates, he just decided to go on the softer red tires for his last stint. Whereas everybody else put their red tires in the middle. So he had a little bit of a different strategy, and his tires started falling off at the end of the race.
Yep.
Rossi was hot in pursuit behind him, but Power was able to hold him off and win the race. All right, so go through the results for that one. And first was Will Power, followed by Alex Rossi and Scott Dixon. And fourth was Newgarden, followed by O'Ward, Palou, Ericsson, Herta, Pagano, Rosenqvist, Malukas, Daly, Sato, Lundgaard, and Jack Harvey in 15th. 16th was Rinus VK, followed by Grosjean, De Francesco, McLaughlin, Kellett, Ferrucci, Johnson, and Calderon. And then the DNFs for this race were Kyle Kirkwood, Helio Castroneves, and Graham Rahal. I guess Scott McLaughlin was able to get going again, but he did crash. I misspoke earlier. But yeah, this was the last race that we'll have at Belle Isle in Detroit. I think they are moving to an actual Detroit city street circuit in the future, so that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see. I guess we'll just wait and see what that track looks like when it actually happens.
Yeah. It's interesting with this kind of narrative of American street tracks all of a sudden popping up all over the place.
Yeah.
It's like they had Nashville, they just brought in a year or two ago, and now we've got Detroit coming in, and that's just an IndyCar. And then in F1, we have Miami came in this year, and then we have Las Vegas starting up next year.
Yeah, well, I'm not in love with the Miami GP, and I'm kind of concerned about the Vegas GP too.
Yeah, it's Miami was a spectacle for sure.
It really was just that show of like American plastic, the fake marina and everything. It's just, man, it doesn't feel like it's supposed to be that way.
No, it felt.
I don't want it to be that way.
It was a little showy, I think. Like I was telling Ben on that episode, it felt more like an event than a race, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I guess. So. While we're deviating off topic here a little bit, have you seen the track layout from the last time Formula One raced in Las Vegas?
Oh, you mean in the Caesars Palace parking lot?
Yeah, in the Caesars Palace parking lot.
Yes.
We're just going like zigzagging and then back to the beginning again. Oh, what an exciting race.
Yep, they had a straight like the width of the parking lot, and then they just zigzagged through it, and then it goes down the straight again.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, I don't know what's going on in Vegas next year, but man, it'll be something.
Yeah. The track is a little more legit. It looks better than the parking lot track, but
that's good.
It's pretty square. I mean, obviously Vegas and most American cities are laid out in a grid, so there's only so much you can do, but we are getting racing down the strip, so I'm pretty excited for that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that should be all right.
Yeah, and it is, I think, a night race too, so that's just going to make it even cooler to watch.
I can't imagine a day race down the Vegas Strip. It'd have to be at night.
That would just feel wrong, just illegal.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on back to the second IndyCar race at Road America. This race was absolutely incredible. This was definitely the best IndyCar race of the season so far. We'll go through qualifying real quick. The top 10 were Rossi, Newgarden, Palou, Ericsson, Herta, O'Ward, Grosjean, Rosenqvist, McLaughlin, and Dixon. So this race kicked off. Everybody was overtaking everybody all the time. There were teammates crashing into each other. We had some pit stop drama. We had some technical failure DNFs. It was a lot. But Alexander Rossi and Joseph Newgarden were the class of the field, and they were the top two for the entire race. Rossi got a really good start. Started to pull away from Newgarden, which was kind of his plan. And then, unfortunately, Jimmy Johnson on lap 1 was shoved into the gravel and stalled his car. Yep. That brought out the first of many cautions of the race.
Yeah, and actually that one was pretty interesting, just seeing the commentary. It looks like we've got a clean start to the race. Oh, except for that, as Johnson's car slides across the frame.
Yeah, poor timing on that one. But so first caution came out, and then we got that all cleaned up, and then Colton Herta on the restart made up a couple of positions. He started in, he qualified 5th, but he started in 11th because he had to take a 6th place grid penalty because his engine that he used for the Indy 500 was not legal. So he got that grid penalty, but he definitely made it up very quickly. But after that, it was like a lap or two, and Marcus Ericsson and Alex Palou came together in turn 3 and broke Palou's front suspension, which ended his race. Not great for teammates.
No.
Yeah.
You hate to see that.
Don't want to do that. Palou was pretty upset at Ericsson, but looking at the replay, it was definitely more Palou's fault. I would say it was a racing incident. It was kind of 50-50, but I don't think there was a penalty deserved at all. But Ericsson was already ahead in the corner when Palou hit him, so I put that on Alex. But anyway, that was the end of his race, which was kind of unfortunate for him since he's a big championship contender and he's the defending champion from last year. So we had our second caution come out, and then after that got cleaned up, we went racing again for a couple laps. And then Devlin DeFrancesco ran into the back of Will Power, sending him into a spin and to the back of the field. It was actually kind of funny. His front wing came off. Will Power's front wing came off in the collision, but it was still kind of hanging onto the front of the car. And so they told him to, as he was driving down the track to get to the pits, they told him to try and wiggle the front wing off, so it wouldn't slice his tires. He ended up doing that by stopping on the track, and then he held the clutch in and started rolling backwards. Got the wing dislodged, and then he stalled the car and caused a caution.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
Yep. So that was we're 3 cautions into the race, and I think we've done maybe 6 laps. Quite wild start.
Yeah.
But then after that, we got some racing for quite a while. Newgarden was able to hold on to the back of Rossi enough to where he was able to jump him in the pit lane. Rossi had a little bit of a slow stop, and he was also held by a car passing by going into their pit box, so he had to wait a couple of extra seconds to get out. And that was just barely enough for Newgarden to get past him in the pit lane. So unfortunately, we didn't really get a pass for the lead, but that's how it goes.
Yep.
Felix Rosenqvist was on an interesting strategy, and his engineer kept giving him fuel numbers to hit, and he was just saving fuel the entire race. And then at the very end of the race, they released him to make his charge, and he did definitely charge through the field after that.
So I guess I didn't watch the race. I'll be perfectly honest here. But It looks like he started in 8th and finished in 6th. Did he drop further down in between?
Yeah. So we dropped down a little bit when he was fuel saving. But I mean, he was up there. So I guess when I say he charged through the field, he didn't really charge through the field as much as he had opened up a large gap to the leaders, and then by the end of the race, he was racing right up there with the leaders.
Okay, gotcha, yeah.
Because there was a late caution that came out, which we'll talk about in a sec, and that closed everybody up, and then it was just madness on the last 4 laps.
Right.
So there was that. Ericsson had a slow final pit stop. Took about 3-4 extra seconds, more than it should have. And that probably cost him a position or 2 in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
And then Pato O'Ward's engine blew up with, I believe, 6 laps to go or so. He had to pull off to the side of the track, and that was the second to last caution of the race. As the green flag flew after they got it cleaned up, there were 5 laps left, and coming out of the last corner onto the main straight, Castroneves spun on the restart and stalled his car, so that caused another caution before I think the leaders even got to turn 1. So they got that cleaned up, and then the final restart happened with 3 laps to go.
So
Ericsson, yeah, right. It was, yeah, definitely a mad dash to the end. Marcus Ericsson got a really good jump on Alex Rossi and passed him into turn 1 to go into second place. And then there was just this massive battle between Colton Herta, Roman Grosjean, Alex Rossi, and Felix Rosenqvist. Like we were saying before, they were battling down the back straight. And Grosjean was off in the dirt, and
oh, yep.
It was wild.
Yeah, just went full on off road in there for a second.
Yeah, he kept it straight, but
Yeah,
he had two wheels in the dirt and was full throttle. Could have gotten pretty bad pretty quickly, but it didn't.
Yeah,
so props to him.
He just sent it. Just lick the stamp and send it.
Yeah, at the end of the straight, Grosjean ended up losing a position because of his trip through the dirt. But he kept his foot in it and absolutely sent it from like 20 feet, more than that, 20, 30 feet back, down the inside of Felix Rosenqvist into turn 3, and made it stick. And that was an absolute send. He broke so late. But then Grosjean continued his charge and passed Colton Herta into turn 1 on the last lap to take 4th position. At the front, after Ericsson passed Rossi, it didn't really change. For the last 4 laps, Newgarden was able to hold Ericsson off, as Ericsson didn't have any more push to pass, and Newgarden still had quite a bit. But yeah, that was the race. There was, 5-6 cautions, something like that. It's pretty nuts for an IndyCar race. But yeah, we'll go through the results real quick. With the podium, on the top step was Joseph Newgarden, followed by Marcus Ericsson and Alex Rossi. In 4th place was Roman Grosjean, followed by Colton Herta, Felix Rosenqvist, Scott McLaughlin, Graham Rahal, Scott Dixon, Christian Lundgaard, Callum Ilott, Simon Pagenaud, Jack Harvey, Connor Daly, Takuma Sato, David Malukas, Rinus VK, Devlin DeFrancesco, Will Power, Kyle Kirkwood in 20th, and then De Silvestro in 21st, followed by Castroneves, Kellett, Johnson, and Calderon. That runs off the finishers, and then the non-finishers were O'Ward and Palou. Lots of drivers.
As an aside, it's kind of nice to see like the old Formula rejects doing pretty well in IndyCar.
Yeah,
you got
like the
old Haas boys. I mean, it looks like they did pretty good in this race. And then you got Felix Rosenqvist, who raced in Formula E back in the day.
Yep.
He's found a home here, too. It's kind of nice to see.
Yeah, I think IndyCar is growing on a lot of drivers and really entering the radar. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw several more F1 drivers jump over. Especially after this kind of pattern of domination that we've had in F1 in the last 20 years, where it seems like there's always just a team that's better for the entire era. But so Marcus Ericsson has been absolutely killing it. He won the Indy 500 this year.
Oh, great.
Yep. So he used to drive for Alfa Romeo. Roman Grosjean was the Haas driver. He's been killing it. He's gotten several podiums and a couple of pole positions too in IndyCar.
Nice.
Like you said, Felix Rosenqvist was in the F1 kind of conversation for a while. Callum Ilott was an F2 driver, and the only reason he didn't make it to F1 was because they ran out of seats and he got sick of waiting. Takuma Sato used to drive for F1. Alex Rossi used to drive for in F1. Lots of stuff. And then you got people like Jimmy Johnson, 7-time NASCAR Cup champion.
Just making the switch.
Yeah. Lots of people that are famous in other series coming to IndyCar. And then, Scott McLaughlin, too, was a huge Australian V8 supercar champion. Gotcha. So he's a big name down there, along with Scott Dixon.
The V8 supercars are pretty fun to watch too.
I
haven't watched those in a long time, but it's a good time.
Yeah. But that kind of rounds out the second IndyCar race. We'll just go quickly. The championship standings, top 3 are Marcus Ericsson, Will Power, and Joseph Newgarden. Also notably, Joseph Newgarden won $1 million for winning that race, that second race.
Oh, nice.
There was a challenge by one of the IndyCar sponsors, the first driver to win an oval, a street track, and a road track. The first driver to win one of each this season wins $1 million. And that went to Joseph Newgarden.
Very nice.
So, I think he splits that 50-50 between his team and the charity of his choice. So, very cool stuff.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I dig.
Alrighty. We'll move on now to everybody's favorite series, Formula One.
The big one.
The big one. All right. This week we had the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Baku. This has always been a favorite race of mine. I always look forward to this race every year.
You know, I always think it's a good one. A lot of people hate on it just because of the track, and overtaking is hard because it's narrow. But it seems like there's always something interesting that happens.
Yeah.
At some point.
It seems like a track that maybe the racing isn't always great, but it generates drama somehow. Yeah. We had plenty of drama this race. I'll be honest, the race itself wasn't very exciting. It was kind of hard to stay awake as I was watching it at 4 a.m. my time.
Yeah.
But there was still quite a bit that happened. And there was actually quite a bit of good racing down in the midfield. It was just out front. There wasn't too much going on. But we'll get to that. For some context, we'll go through the qualifying order. In first, on pole position, we had Charles Leclerc, followed by Perez, Verstappen, Sainz, Russell, Gasly, Hamilton, Tsunoda, Vettel, Alonso, Norris, Ricciardo, Ocon, Zhou, Bottas, Magnussen, Albon, Latifi, Stroll, and Schumacher. Not a great qualifying for Bottas. He's usually been higher this year. Tsunoda has been surprising me this year. I really used to dog on him, especially last year.
Right, but he's doing pretty well with the AlphaTauri car.
He is. Yeah, he's definitely seeming way more comfortable in the car, and he's actually thrashing Gasly in the championship right now. So a couple of standout performances there in qualifying. Mick Schumacher still struggling down in 20th.
Yep.
Unfortunately. But we'll move on to the race. On lap 1 at the start, Leclerc didn't get a super great start, and so Perez was able to take the lead into turn 1. And then just drove off into the sunset instantly.
Yep.
So Leclerc was able to hold off Verstappen, though, and maintain his second place. One thing I will say, Perez did push his tires a little too hard trying to open up that lead. And so he kind of cooked them before they were really ready to be pushed too hard.
Right.
So he struggled on tires for the second half of that first stint. But on lap 9, Carlos Sainz had a hydraulic and gearbox failure, and that caused the first safety car of the race, or a virtual safety car. So Leclerc and most of the rest of the field pitted, while both Red Bulls and McLarens went on different strategies. They wanted to pit Perez to cover off Leclerc, but they didn't get that call done in time, so he was unable to pit under safety car, which kind of sucked for him. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened if he had pit, if the race would have ended differently. Just with everybody on different strategies and such.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, it looked like it was starting to heat up, and it looked like it was going to be a really good race at the end with all the strategies kind of crescendoing towards the end of the race. I was excited. And then, we'll get to what happened.
Yeah.
But Sebastian Vettel had a good start and was making up places, but then when he went to go past Ocon, I think it was Ocon, it might have been Alonso, but it was one of them.
He DRS'd a little too much.
DRS'd a little too much, yeah. Kind of forgot to brake for about 50 meters.
Locked her up right into the escape route. I mean, granted, though, he did make the save. He goosed it, spun it around. I mean, at least he had his... What do I want to say here? He had his wits about him. He knew he messed up and then seemed to rectify it about as quick as one could.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, anyways.
Yeah, he was able to spin it around in the escape road, which was he was one of the few that was able to do that. You saw Lando Norris made a 5-point turn to get out of that in practice.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was
credit
good.
Where credit's due.
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely a good recovery. He only lost a couple of seconds. his re-entry to the track was a little sketchy.
Yep.
He almost took Tsunoda out. But, it all turned out okay. And then on lap 15, Max Verstappen caught up to and overtook Sergio Perez. Hamilton was also having a good race on his alternate strategy. Even though he was having some major problems with porpoising, it looks like, in Spain that they had gotten rid of that problem, or at least alleviated it a little bit.
And here we are.
Here we are, and it's back with a vengeance. It was so bad this race, and it was hurting his back. He was complaining over the radio.
I haven't really kept up with the whole porpoising thing. I saw it in preseason testing and went, what's that all about? What have they figured out what's causing it, or what the deal is with the porpoising?
Right. So
what they're gonna do about it?
Porpoising. There's different creative ways that they've gotten rid of it. Basically, what it is the car creates too much downforce on the straights, and it bottoms out the suspension, which causes the car to bounce up, and then it creates more downforce, which causes it to bottom out the suspension again. It gets in that cycle. So
it just resonates there. Yeah.
Yep.
That seems like a massive oversight in the design of the formula.
Yeah.
Apparently we didn't wind tunnel test this enough before we just sent them out for preseason testing. And I guess I'm kind of bewildered as to how they haven't fixed it yet. Right.
Yeah, it's a common problem with cars that generate a lot of downforce underneath the car with ground effects. Right. So this is the first time we've had actual ground effect cars since like the 80s, because they were banned back in the 80s because cars got way too fast and people were dying.
Yep.
So that's kind of just something that comes along with ground effect cars. But I don't think people were anticipating it being as much of a problem as it was. There's some interesting, clever solutions that some teams have made. Like Red Bull basically just put skids on the bottom of their car, so that it doesn't bottom out the suspension. I don't know exactly how it works.
Well, aren't they supposed to have a skid on the bottom of the car anyways, and it gets measured at the end of the race to make sure that they're not bottoming out too hard?
Right, that's the plank, and that's been one of my questions as to like how is porpoising happening, and yet the plank is like not being ground down too far.
Right. Yeah, I don't know, man.
It's I'm sure I don't know. But that's why they get paid the big bucks to make these cars.
Yeah, that's why they have engineers instead of, two dudes doing a podcast.
Exactly.
Designing Formula 1 cars.
But yeah, regardless, porpoising was really bad this week for a lot of teams, and so hopefully, and the interesting thing is Canada's a very similar track in that there's a lot of long straights, so it's going to be interesting to see what teams do next week. Because Lewis, I don't think, can take another race like that, or he's going to blow his back out. But anyway, Verstappen pitted on lap 19, and then Perez followed in on lap 20. And also on lap 20, Charles Leclerc, who was running in third place at the time and looking pretty good, his engine blew up again, just like Spain. And he was forced to limp back to the pit lane and end his race.
It looks like Ferrari's back, baby. We got, the race strategists sitting there with their clown wigs on. We got the whole thing, man. Ferrari is Ferrarying again.
Yep, they do Ferrari things where, we look really good and then we kind of just don't. We throw it all away.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard being a member of the Tifosi, man.
Yeah.
I think you have to be a masochist.
Yeah.
You just have to enjoy watching them lose races for no good reason.
Yeah, who are you? I don't think I've talked to you about this. Who are you rooting for this year?
It's been an interesting year. Normally I would root for like one of my favorite drivers, Vettel's a great guy. One of my favorite drivers for sure. But is he really competitive this year? Not so much. Verstappen is all right. I like him as a driver, but He's also maybe starting to get a little bit of the Lewis Hamilton thing going on, winning too many races.
Yeah, I can see that.
I don't know. So, I don't know if I have a favorite this year.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just going to see what happens.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's my cop-out for not keeping up with Formula One really closely until
now. That's fair. Yeah, I don't know if
you get busy, you miss a race or two, and then suddenly it's 3 or 4 races that you missed.
Then half the season, then the season's over. You're like, gone. Oh, that's cool.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
No, I get that. That was me a couple years ago.
Yeah.
But anyway, moving on. From Leclerc's engine failure, Gasly was able to move himself up into P4 briefly, having a fantastic race. He hasn't really had too many good races this season, so it's a good showing from him to get well into the points.
Mm-hmm.
And then towards the end of the race, Yuki Tsunoda's rear wing split in half.
Oh yes,
I don't know.
I think that's one of my favorite things I've ever seen in a Formula One race. Maybe where you have this wonderful shot of 4 engineers fighting over one roll of speed tape, trying to slap it on this rear wing as quick as they can, and just really making a mess out of it. And then going, yeah, all right, no more DRS for this race. And I can just imagine Tsunoda sitting in the cockpit going, what do you mean? What do you mean no more DRS? What am I supposed to do?
I don't think he actually knew what happened until after the race.
Yeah.
But it was, his rear wing, split in half down the middle.
Yeah. Kind of just gave up and called it a day.
Yeah, and his engineers, when he pit, literally just duct taped it back together, and they were talking about how they wanted to get an FIA person out there to inspect it to make sure it was safe, but they sent him out before, the guy was sprinting up to the car, and they sent him right as he got there.
Oh, jeez. So, and I mean, what's that guy supposed to do? Oh yeah, it looks like you got enough tape on there. That should do.
Yeah.
What's he supposed to say? What's he supposed to do?
I don't know.
Obviously, it's not okay.
No. I mean, with the amount of force on that wing,
Yeah. And I mean, through my careful analysis of the footage, it looks like they got a whole 3 pieces of tape on it.
Something like that.
Yeah.
I think that was the longest pit stop we've had so far this season.
That would not surprise me.
Yeah, interesting tidbit for the pit stop championship later on. But then nearing the end of the race, on lap 44, Hamilton overtook Gasly to take P4 after starting in 7th. So really good race from Hamilton, especially considering the porpoising problems. He seemed to have it worse than Russell did. I don't know if that was just setup based or what the deal was.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I was shocked that he was even able to drive it and finish the race after that.
Yeah, I mean, hey, once again, credit where credit's due. That was not a DNF for him. He finished the race with that broken rear wing. So
yeah,
I guess they did something right.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, the race ended up with Verstappen, Perez, and Russell in the top 3. Mm-hmm. And the fastest lap went to Sergio Perez, and the driver of the day went to Lewis Hamilton.
I see.
All right, so we'll go through the results real quick. Leading was Verstappen, followed by Perez, Russell, Hamilton, Gasly, Vettel, Alonso, Ricciardo, Norris, and Ocon in 10th, followed by Bottas, Albon, Tsunoda, Schumacher, and Latifi. That rounds off the finishers, and then the non-finishers were Stroll, Magnussen, Zhou, Leclerc, and Sainz. So Red Bull is really starting to pull away in the championship after kind of a rough start.
Yep.
They started with that double DNF in Bahrain, and now that's been balanced out, and Ferrari has their double DNF here.
Yep.
So now it's the question mark is very much on Ferrari in terms of their reliability when it was on Red Bull before.
I'm pretty sure I've seen this before. I've seen this movie before where Ferrari seems to do okay in the beginning of the season, and then it just kind of doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what I am worried about this year. I'm not sure they're going to be able to hold their position in the Constructor Championship, and if their drivers will be able to maintain their standings in the World Driver Championship either.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like you said, they might not even finish second in the championship if they continue this form, because Mercedes has been consistent. I mean, they're not at the front per se, but they finish every race and they pick up the pieces where they can if other teams struggle.
Right.
And they've been absolutely killing it in that regard. George Russell continues his streak of consistency, finishing in the top 5 in every single race this season. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where Mercedes ends up, and then if they have to sacrifice lap time just to alleviate the porpoising problem, so that they don't destroy their drivers.
Right.
I mean, obviously they can tune porpoising out of the car by raising the ride height, but that gives up a lot of lap time because you're literally just getting rid of downforce.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a middle ground in there somewhere, but
yeah, it's just a matter of...
I'm not an engineer. They don't pay me enough to find out what that value is.
Exactly. But yeah, Gasly had a good race. Vettel also had a very good race, scoring points for Aston Martin, and I think points are going to be pretty few and far between for that team this year. So
yeah,
Vettel seems to do really well at Baku anyway. He has a really good track record here. So
true.
Cool to see him doing well. Yeah, and then Zhou and Magnussen both retired with power unit problems. Both of them run Ferrari power units, so that's just, that was four Ferrari engine issues in one race. Not great.
Yeah, no, not great.
No.
That's adding to why I'm concerned about their performance later in the season. Well, this is one race. 4 engines is kind of a fluke.
Yeah.
Is it? Probably. Maybe not.
Yeah.
In conclusion, I don't know, man. We'll see what comes.
Exactly. But anyway, for Zhou, really unfortunate because that poor guy, he's been retired on technical problems like so many times this season. Seems like every time he's doing somewhat okay, he has to retire because his engine fails. It's getting kind of hard to watch because he's a quality driver. He just he's driving really well, and you can tell that he's got the skills and the ability to be here, but his car just can't handle it.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if it's going to get picked up by a different team in the next year or two, and if we'll see something better from him, just being in a better car.
Maybe. It's going to be really interesting to see how the silly season plays out this year.
Yeah. Well, and we haven't started playing musical chairs yet with the drivers. That's a few months away, so.
Yeah, that's going to be summer break probably. We'll see a lot of driver movement then. Yeah. It's going to be... I'm excited to see what happens, especially with McLaren, because what are they going to do with Daniel Ricciardo? Are they going to keep him?
Yeah.
Are they going to replace him? That's the big one right now.
I hope he has a seat somewhere, he's made some maybe career blunders in team choice, but
Well, it's kind of hard because the teams he chooses, while they may be on the up and up, that's not necessarily good for him because he has a driving style that's very particular, and so he needs a car that fits his driving style. And from what I've seen and heard, the McLaren is pretty much the exact opposite of his driving style. Ricciardo likes a really oversteery car like the Red Bull, but the McLaren's really understeery, and Lando Norris thrives on that, whereas Ricciardo does not, and so he's having to relearn how to drive basically, which is why I think he's struggling compared to a lot of the other people.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be surprised. I was kind of hinting at this earlier a little bit. I would be surprised if Ricardo doesn't get a seat next year. That I wouldn't be surprised if he goes to IndyCar.
I could definitely see him in IndyCar.
He would fit really well in IndyCar. He loves the U.S. So I think that's on his radar. I think Vettel might also venture that way at the end of the season.
You know what else I could see? Just as a twinkle in my eye, Daniel Ricciardo going to NASCAR.
He has talked about that.
Right? Like,
yeah.
I could see that. Like, if I saw that in the news, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I could see it because he was a big NASCAR fan when he was a little kid. That's why he's number 3, is because that was Dale Earnhardt's number.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So, yeah, he's a big NASCAR fan. So that would be interesting too. Completely different racing series. But again, I think he'd fit pretty well there. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Danny Rick take on America next year.
No. Well, depending on if he doesn't get a seed and
right.
Whatever happens.
Yep. So moving on to our championship standings, Perez moves into second, passing Leclerc. And this is the first time, I just saw it earlier today, this is the first time we've had Red Bull 1 and 2 in the championship since 2014.
Oh, yeah, back when Vettel was still racing with him.
Yep. So it's Red Bull's very much back in a big way, and they're definitely going for that championship this year. I don't really see them not getting it at this point, unless they absolutely collapse at the end of the season, but they have an 80-point lead in the championship as it stands right now.
Yeah, they're doing quite well. And, the humor of having the Constructor Championship the way that it is right now, right? We have really well-known car manufacturers like McLaren and Mercedes and Ferrari and Alfa Romeo. We have these prestigious high-performance car brands. But who's on the top? Energy drink company.
Energy drink company.
of like the peak motorsport in the world, like Formula One, man, that's the top. You made it in Formula One, you made it. And which company is currently kicking ass in Formula One? Energy drink company.
Energy drink company. Yeah. It's kind of wild.
Yeah.
But I mean, it kind of makes sense too, because I would say Red Bull is more of a marketing company now than a drink company.
That's not incorrect.
So
just with all the weird sports and extreme stuff they sponsor, yeah.
Yeah, they know how sponsorships work, and so they know how to source money. So, there's that, but yeah, like you said, it's you've got Ferrari and Mercedes and these massive car companies that can't even come close really at the moment to this energy drink company. Yeah.
Maybe they're just putting Red Bull in the cars. Okay.
Yes, Red Bull gives you wins, right?
Red Bull gives you wins.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah, Ferrari is really struggling at the moment. They've had 3 pretty bad races in a row, and George Russell is now only 17 points behind Leclerc in the championship. So,
man,
if Russell passes Leclerc, I think that's just not. I think that's the sign that Ferrari's not going to make it this year.
Yeah. I mean, I had hopes, but they're waning.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of season left. We're only about a third of the way through, so anything can happen. Season could get really spicy at the end.
I mean, hey, the video game's not even out for this season yet, is it?
No, I think that comes out in a week or two, a couple weeks.
Yep.
But yeah, so that was the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. We'll go into our segments to end the episode off. We'll start with our overtake of the week briefly. I gave that to Roman Grosjean on Felix Rosenqvist at Road America in the second IndyCar race we talked about. Like we said, he licked the stamp and sent it down the inside. So, good job for Grosjean. Just as a side note to that, I am really happy for him. after his incident at the end of his last F1 season.
Right.
Just to get back in a race car, not even just an F1 car, just any race car. I can't even imagine.
Just get back in the saddle and, make it happen.
Yeah, he's making it happen in a big way and scoring podiums and absolutely killing it in the U.S. So, really happy for him. It's good to see him doing well, and he seems happier than ever. So, with all that being said, we'll move on to the Pit Stop Championship. Sergio Perez did not win this week, as he usually does. In fact, Perez wasn't even in the points. He had 2 pretty poor stops this week. So some karma coming back to him on that front. Sebastian Vettel ended up with the fastest pit stop with a 20.249. And
very nice.
So the points finishers were Vettel, Russell, Alonso, Verstappen, Hamilton, Bottas, Norris, Albon, Magnussen, and Ricciardo. Notably, Kevin Magnussen and Valtteri Bottas scored their first points of the year in the Pit Stop Championship. Bottas actually scored 8 points and moves up into 17th place, so he jumped a few people with this race. So, good pit stop for him, for once. Poor Bottas, that man gets screwed over on pit stops all the time.
Well, I figured it would have gotten better with him not being on the same team as Lewis Hamilton, the star, the celebrity. But, maybe it just follows him like a dark cloud.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe it's a mindset thing. Sebastian Vettel was the fastest person to not move. And then, just briefly...
Actually,
what's up?
Something I'd like to bring up about this, the Pit Stop Championship, is that Yuki Tsunoda is only in 19th out of 20. Somehow Charles Leclerc has had a slower pit stop, despite the fact that they had engineers arguing over tape to fix his rear wing.
Oh, yeah.
So, let's talk about that real quick. How did that happen? What was Ferrari doing?
Oh, okay. No, okay. I know what happened. So when I do these, I take all of the pit stops, and then I only count their fastest pit stop. So Yuki Tsunoda had, I think, 2 pit stops this race. So the first one was the one you're seeing on here.
That's the one that counts. Okay. All right.
Yeah. I'll have to figure out the time for the slow one. But yeah, okay. So Tsunoda had 2 really bad pit stops this race.
Yeah.
Awesome. But we'll just go through the championship standings. Top 5 is still Perez, Norris, Verstappen, Hamilton, Leclerc, and Alonso. I think Alonso has moved up after last time. And then in the constructors, it's still Red Bull and McLaren very much at the top. And then Mercedes, Ferrari, and Alpine are all right there, close to each other, with a 3-point spread between those 3 teams. So
we'll see what happens.
4. 3 or 4. Anyway, so Azerbaijan are our predictions for this race. Ben and I's predictions. I'll go through Ben's real quick. He put Verstappen, Leclerc, Sainz, Perez, and Russell as his top 5, with Bottas as his dark horse. He got the winner of the race. Everything else was wrong. And then he said fastest lap was Verstappen, was his guess, and driver of the day was Perez for his guess. The top 5 were Verstappen, Perez, Russell, Hamilton, and Gasly. For my guesses for last week, I said Verstappen, Perez, Leclerc, Russell, Sainz, and Hamilton as my dark horse. So I got the top 2, and then my dark horse ended up in the top 5. So I'm pretty happy with that. I guessed Perez for the fastest lap, and I was correct. It did go to Perez. And then I guessed Vettel for driver of the day because he usually does way better than he should at this track. But unfortunately, Lewis Hamilton absolutely killed it and got driver of the day, and I even voted for Hamilton, so can't be too mad at that. But that was our predictions for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Now let's move on to our predictions for next week and the Canadian Grand Prix. I will go through my top 5 first, and then I'll let you guess your top 5.
Sure.
So I'm gonna say Leclerc wins this one, and then Verstappen, and then Sainz, and then Perez, and then Russell.
Mm-hmm.
Very safe top 5 for me, I guess. And then dark horse, I'll go out of the blue and I'll say Norris.
Norris, okay. All right. So I've got to put some thought into this here. I'm going to say for number 1, Max Verstappen. Second, Leclerc. Third, Sainz. Fourth, Perez. Fifth, Lewis Hamilton.
Okay.
Dark horse, Bottas.
Bottas, okay. Interesting. All right, cool.
Now, I'm curious about a category extension for the prediction. Who goes into the Wall of Champions this race?
Oh, this is a good one for Canada. Okay, so for those who are unaware, the Wall of Champions is coming out of the final turn. There is a really, really tight chicane at the end of the lap in Canada. And so it's a quick right-left. And on the outside of the left-hand turn, there is a concrete wall that many F1 champions have crashed and ended their races into. So if we're talking Wall of Champions, it's going to be either Verstappen, Vettel, Alonso, or Hamilton, right?
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be the champions. It can be anybody on the grid. Just who do you think is going to hit it?
That's fair. I guess that's just why it's called the Wall of Champions. It's because so many champions have crashed there. Who do I think is going to go into the... Well, okay, it's easy. Never mind. Mick Schumacher.
You think? I mean...
Oh, it could be Latifi, too.
Those would be good guesses. I'm going to be extremely pessimistic and say Danny Rick.
Ew, yeah, it could happen.
It could happen. I don't want it to happen.
Right.
Something in the back of my mind tells me, with the McLaren and the new car, and, maybe.
Maybe.
It's within the realm of possibility.
All right, so I'm going to narrow down mine and say... I'll say it's Schumacher. So you say Ricardo?
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'll say Schumacher. Our fastest lap prediction, I'm going to go with Verstappen.
Let's see. I'm going to say Perez.
Okay. And driver of the day, I'm going to say... Ooh. See, I always want to go with the hometown hero, but it can't be Lance Stroll. That's not going to happen.
No.
And it's not going to be Latifi either. So neither of the Canadian drivers. I don't think it's going to be the top drivers for some reason. I'm going to say...
Yeah.
I'm going to go with Esteban Ocon.
And I'm going to go with Bottas again.
Okay.
For driver of the day. He, at least from what I remember, he seems like he does pretty well in Montreal. So,
yeah. All right.
We'll see.
We'll see. All right. So, do you have anything else you would like to tell the wonderful people before we sign off, Daniel?
No.
Okay. You're going to be here next week, right?
That is the plan, yes. Hopefully
awesome.
Better prepared.
No, you did great. Cool. So Daniel and I will see you next week for the Canadian Grand Prix. I know I said last time that we would cover Le Mans in this episode, but I think I'm going to save that one and maybe do a special episode over the summer break on Le Mans. Kind of a historical, what it is, why it's cool kind of thing.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll do that. I'll think about how I'm going to do that.
Yep.
But all that being said, thank you everybody so much for listening to this episode of RevHang. If you enjoyed it, leave a like or rating on the platform you listened on. It really helps us out. If you'd like to follow our thoughts and opinions on the motorsport world, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at RevHang Media. If you have any thoughts or questions about racing or even about us, post a tweet at #RevHangPodcast, and we may feature your question on the next show. We would absolutely love to interact with you guys. You can follow me on Instagram at 2n_squared, and while you're at it, you can check out our website, revhang.com, where you can find a calendar of our upcoming races, updated standings for the racing series we talk about, along with our horrific predictions for the F1 season. We'll return in a week to talk about the Canadian Grand Prix, but until then, I have been Nathan.
And I have been Daniel.
Thanks for hanging out, everybody.